Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. Can you blame a man for his weaknesses? For not intervening when cruelty reigns around him? For looking away when someone is being broken? Sometimes, it's not cowardice, it's habit. But Nick Velton was different. He simply stayed silent and did push-ups. The dusty pink dawn crept between Claverett's towering black stone buildings like spilled blood. Nick's arms burned as he pushed against the cobblestones, sweat dripping onto the ancient stones that had witnessed centuries of commerce and carnage. His battered black jacket lay folded beside him, the sword slit gleaming silver where countless draws had worn the leather thin. Seriously listening to this garbage again? Urich's voice crackled through his internal speakers, the round droid bouncing on cobblestones like an indignant metallic basketball. His single lens whirred as it focused on Nick's steady rhythm. Heroes, push-ups, ancient swords. What's the point if you never save anyone anyway? Nick didn't break form. 47. 48. The audiobook narrator's voice filled his headphones with tales of legendary warriors who carved justice from chaos. Fiction, mostly, but the discipline felt real. Form doesn't deteriorate, Nick said between controlled breaths. 49. 50. Boring fool. Urich rolled closer, his spherical chassis scraping against the market's shadow where they'd made camp beside a rusted scrap metal truck. Strength isn't silence. It's expressing emotions. When's the last time you felt anything? Nick rose to his feet, brushing dust from his palms. The question hung in the morning air like smoke from the distant refineries. When had he last felt anything? The memories stayed locked behind walls he'd built from necessity, not choice. I feel plenty. He pulled on his jacket, the familiar weight settling across his shoulders. I just don't broadcast it. Right, like that time you watched those mercs beat that kid bloody last week. Felt plenty then, didn't you? The words hit harder than Urich intended. Nick's jaw tightened as he adjusted his headphones, but he said nothing. The kid had lived. That counted for something. A sound echoed down the narrow street, scraping, rhythmic, accompanied by jeers and laughter. Nick's hand instinctively moved toward his sword hilt before he caught himself. None of his business. Never was. Oh, wonderful, Urich muttered, his lens rotating toward the approaching noise. Another cleansing ritual, just what this charming morning needed. The crowd materialized from the morning mist like ghosts made flesh. Market vendors abandoned their stalls to follow the procession, their faces twisted with the particular mixture of disgust and fascination that public humiliation always bred. Children ran alongside, throwing pebbles and shouting insults their parents had taught them. And there, in the center of it all, she crawled. Nick had seen cleansing rituals before. The fallen Aryan bloodline, once the planet's saviors, now its scapegoats, regularly provided entertainment for Claveret's citizens. The rituals were legal, sanctioned, and thoroughly normalized. Everyone had grown accustomed to this particular brand of degradation. But this girl was different. Her skin gleamed purple-blue in the dawn light, unmarked by scars despite whatever had brought her to this moment. Her bright blue eyes fixed on the cobblestones as she moved forward on hands and knees, a chain around her neck that clinked with each movement. She was perhaps 20, with the kind of natural beauty that made crowds gather for reasons beyond mere spectacle. The overseer walked beside her, a fat man in official robes who munched on a piece of fruit between barked commands. He spat juice that landed on her back, the crowd erupting in appreciative laughter. "Move faster, Aryan filth," the overseer bellowed. "The sun won't wait for your shame." Nick's fingers found his sword hilt. The familiar weight of the archaic steel blade grounded him as his pulse quickened. The weapon was a relic, actual metal in an age of energy weapons, but it had never failed him. "Don't even think about it," Urich whispered, rolling closer. "You know the law. Humans can't use violence here. Only the authorities can dish out punishment. The girl stumbled, her palms scraping against sharp stones. Blood welled on her knees. The overseer laughed and spat again, this time aiming for her hair. Nick stood. The movement was casual, unremarkable. He simply rose from his position by the truck and drew his sword in one fluid motion. The blade sang as it left its sheath, the sound cutting through the crowd's noise like a prayer through static. He didn't aim for the girl, didn't target the guards flanking the procession. Instead, he hurled the weapon with devastating precision at the overseer's feet, where it buried itself in the cobblestones between his legs with a sharp crack of splitting stone. The crowd fell silent. "Enough," Nick said. The single word carried across the square with the weight of absolute conviction. The overseer dropped his fruit, his face cycling through confusion, outrage, and something approaching fear. "Are you insane?" Urich's voice pitched higher as he spun in agitated circles. "You can't just throw a sword at an officer and expect to walk away. Again." But Nick was already moving. The crowd parted before him, not from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or the instinctive understanding that they were witnessing something that would reshape their carefully ordered world. He reached the girl and knelt beside her, pulling off his jacket in one smooth motion. She looked up at him with those startling blue eyes, confusion and hope warring across her features. When he wrapped the jacket around her shoulders and lifted her into his arms, she didn't resist. "This is the mother of my future child," Nick announced to the crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the silent square. "Touch her, and I'll use you to dust off your own god." The girl's breath caught. She stared at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, part gratitude, part disbelief, and something else that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "You're completely insane," Urich muttered, but his voice held a note of pride. Magnificent, but insane. The moment shattered as 6 heavily armored guards pushed through the crowd, their ceremonial weapons gleaming in the morning light. On Karen, violence by humans was absolutely forbidden. Only law enforcement could use force. The guards represented order, authority, and the promise of swift justice for anyone foolish enough to challenge the system. The crowd's silence transformed into anticipatory murmurs. Public executions were rare treats, especially when the condemned was human. They pressed closer, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Nick shifted the girl's weight in his arms, feeling her trembling against his chest. She was lighter than he'd expected, all sharp angles and barely contained strength. When he looked down at her, she was watching his face with an intensity that made something twist in his stomach. "Forgive me, my love," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead with surprising gentleness. "Just keep your eyes closed for a moment." She didn't understand. How could she? But something in his voice made her obey without question. Her eyelids fluttered shut, long lashes casting shadows on her purple-tinged cheeks. The trust implicit in that simple gesture hit him like a physical blow. "And here he is, back in the game, ladies and gentlemen." Urich's voice boomed across the square as he activated his external speakers, his commentary carrying the manic energy of a sports announcer. "The man with the dusty face, steel nerves, and a museum sword. Will he survive until dinner? Place your bets while you're still breathing." The first guard stepped forward, massive in his green-tinted armor. His weapon hummed with barely contained energy as he raised it toward Nick's chest. "Stand down, human," the guard commanded. "Release the criminal and submit to judgment." Nick's response was a blur of motion so fast the eye struggled to follow. His free hand found his sword hilt. When had he retrieved it? And drew the blade in a single, perfect arc. The movement looked almost casual, as if he were simply stretching after his morning exercises. The guard stood motionless for a heartbeat, apparently unharmed. "He missed," someone shouted from the crowd. "Didn't even scratch the armor." Laughter rippled through the spectators, relief and disappointment mixing in equal measure. The overseer straightened, his confidence returning as he prepared to resume the ritual. Then the guard's helmet slid sideways and tumbled to the cobblestones with a metallic clang. The laughter died as the guard's body followed, the upper and lower halves separating with mechanical precision. The cut had been so clean, so perfect that reality seemed to hesitate before acknowledging what had happened. "And first knockout!" Urich screamed, his voice cracking with excitement. "Friends, smash that like button if you're still alive. He did that with a girl in his arms, pure romance at its finest." Two more guards drew their blasters, the energy weapons whining as they powered up. They moved with trained coordination, trying to flank him from both sides. Nick's response was a spinning kick that sent both weapons flying in high arcs across the square. Before they'd even hit the ground, his sword was moving again, up through the first guard's visor, withdrawing, then sweeping horizontally through the second guard's midsection with surgical precision. "This is romance with steel, people." Urich continued his commentary, rolling between the falling bodies like a demented cheerleader. "Seriously, ladies, he works out every morning. The girl in his arms just became royalty. Everyone else, sorry, but you missed your chance." The remaining three guards hesitated, their formation wavering as they processed the impossible scene before them. Elite soldiers, trained from birth, armed with the finest weapons Kairin could produce, and a single human with an antique sword was cutting through them like paper. Nick didn't give them time to regroup. The sword sang through the air, finding gaps in armor with supernatural accuracy. Each movement flowed into the next with deadly elegance, a dance of violence that left no room for doubt or mercy. When the last guard fell, silence reclaimed the square. The crowd had retreated to what they hoped was a safe distance, their faces pale with shock and dawning terror. The overseer had vanished entirely, leaving only scattered fruit to mark his presence. Nick stood alone among the bodies, the girl still cradled in his arms. His breathing remained steady, controlled, not even winded. "Now you can open your eyes," he said softly. "It's finished." She obeyed slowly, her gaze taking in the carnage before settling on his face. Her blue eyes were wide, searching, trying to understand what kind of man could kill 6 trained soldiers while holding her like she was made of spun glass. "You?" Her voice was barely a whisper, roughened by whatever ordeal had brought her to the ritual. "Who are you?" Nick looked down at her, something shifting in his chest that he'd thought long dead. For the first time in years, his carefully maintained emotional walls showed cracks. "The one who will never give you to anyone else again," he said, and meant every word. The girl, Leonara, stared at him with an expression that mixed wonder, fear, and something that might have been recognition. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Around them, Claveret held its breath, waiting to see what impossible thing would happen next. The ruined abbey squatted against Claveret's eastern cliffs like a broken tooth, its shattered spires reaching toward a sky that had forgotten mercy. Nick carried Leonara through the collapsed archway, her weight familiar now against his chest, though they'd only known each other for hours. Urich rolled behind them, his single lens sweeping the debris-strewn interior with mechanical precision. "Charming place," Urich muttered, his voice echoing off cracked stone walls. "Nothing says romantic hideaway like mold and structural damage." Nick ignored him, focusing on the layout. The main hall still stood mostly intact, its vaulted ceiling scarred but solid. Broken pews lay scattered like ancient bones, and shattered stained glass crunched under his boots. This had been a children's shelter once. He could see the telltale signs in the low doorways and small alcoves carved into the walls. "You can put me down now," Leonara said quietly. Her voice carried better in the enclosed space, revealing a slight accent he couldn't place. "I won't break." Nick lowered her carefully, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. She wore his jacket like armor, the dark leather swallowing her slight frame. When she stepped away, cold air rushed between them. "Thank you," she said, then turned to explore the ruins. She moved with unconscious grace, her bare feet silent on the stone floor. The chain around her neck caught the filtered light streaming through broken windows, but she'd wrapped it around her wrist like jewelry rather than hiding it. Everything about her suggested strength wrapped in vulnerability, or maybe the reverse. "So," she called over her shoulder, examining a section of wall near what had once been an altar, "do you make a habit of rescuing random women, or am I special?" The question carried enough flirtation to make Nick's pulse quicken. He found himself studying the curve of her spine where it disappeared beneath his jacket, the way her purple skin seemed to glow in the dim light. "You're not random," he said. "Ah." She traced patterns in the stone with one finger. "So I am special. Good to know my market value hasn't completely—" She stopped speaking so abruptly that Nick moved toward her. "What is it?" Leonara stood frozen before a section of wall, her hand pressed against carved symbols barely visible beneath years of grime and neglect. When Nick reached her side, he saw what had captured her attention, 2 letters scratched into the stone with crude precision. N+L. Something cold moved through Nick's chest. The carving was old, 7, maybe 8 years, but preserved by the abbey's dry interior. He knew those marks, had made them himself with a stolen knife during his 3 days in this place, back when he'd been someone else entirely. "This is—" Leonara's voice cracked. She turned to face him, her blue eyes wide with recognition and something approaching panic. "This is impossible. Is it?" Nick stepped closer, studying her face with new intensity. 7 years had changed them both, him from frightened boy to hardened survivor, her from waif to stunning woman, but something fundamental remained constant: the tilt of her head when she was thinking, the way she bit her lower lip when nervous. "You were the girl with no name," he said quietly. Leonara laughed, but the sound held no humor. "And you were the boy who wouldn't cry, even when they beat you." She touched the carving again, her fingers trembling. "I thought I'd imagined you. After everything that happened, I convinced myself you were just a dream." Urich cleared his optical sensors with an electronic cough. "Well, this is getting interesting. Should I start playing romantic music, or would you prefer I document this reunion for posterity?" "Shut up, Urich," Nick said without heat, his attention fixed on Leonara. She wandered deeper into the ruins, drawn by memories he was only beginning to unlock. Near a collapsed section of wall, she knelt and began digging through rubble with desperate intensity. "It has to be here," she muttered. "They took everything else, but this place, they wouldn't come back here." "What are you looking for?" Instead of answering, she pulled something from beneath a chunk of masonry and held it up to the light. A small metal flower crafted from twisted wire and scraps, its petals blackened with age but still recognizable. Nick's world tilted sideways. "You kept it," he said, wonder creeping into his voice. "Always." Leonara cradled the flower against her chest like it was made of precious metal instead of salvaged junk. "Even when they stripped me, even when they said I was nothing, I kept this. Because a boy once told me that something beautiful could grow anywhere, even in the worst places." The memory surfaced like a drowning man breaching water. 3 days in hell, and then the selection. Karen's cold voice. "This one shows promise. Bring him." "Leonara," Nick said, testing the name on his tongue. She looked up sharply. "How do you know that? I never told you." "Because I'm Nick Velton, from Blant Colony Camp, and 7 years ago I promised I'd come back for you." The flower slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering against stone. Leonara stared at him with an expression cycling through disbelief, hope, and something dangerously close to joy. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You were just a child. Children don't remember promises like that." "I remember everything." Nick moved closer, drawn by gravity he couldn't resist. "How you gave me half your ration when I was too proud to ask for food. How you never flinched when the other kids called me deviant. How you said we'd both be important someday." "Stop." Tears tracked down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Just stop. You can't be him. He was soft and kind and innocent. You're—" She gestured helplessly at his sword, his scars, the casual violence he'd displayed in the square. "You're dangerous. War changes people. War breaks people. There's a difference." Nick reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away tears. "I came back," he said simply, "just like I promised." Leonara's composure shattered. She collapsed against his chest, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to tear themselves from her soul. Nick held her, one hand stroking her hair while she wept for lost years and impossible reunions. "I thought you were dead," she gasped between sobs. "Everyone said the selections were death sentences. I waited so long." "I know. I'm sorry." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes, her face streaked with tears but radiant with something he'd forgotten existed. Hope, maybe, or absolution. "You're really him," she said, wonder replacing despair. "My boy with the broken smile." "Your boy," Nick agreed. "If you'll have me." Leonara's answer was a kiss that tasted of salt and redemption, desperate and hungry and 7 years overdue. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing through her tears. "This is insane," she said. "I'm covered in bruises, wearing your jacket, and we're in a ruin. Not exactly romantic." "You're beautiful," Nick said with absolute conviction. "You're mine. And if you'll let me, I want our child to grow inside you." The words surprised him with their intensity, but they felt right. True in a way that bypassed logic and struck directly at something primal. Leonara's breath caught. "Nick." "And this is where I make my exit," Yurik announced, his voice pitched loud enough to shatter the moment. "Should I patrol the perimeter, or would you prefer I power down completely? Though honestly, this place is structurally unsound. If you're planning to make babies, maybe find somewhere that won't collapse mid-thrust." "Yurik," Nick growled. "What? I'm being practical. Romance is all well and good, but safety first. Besides, someone needs to keep watch for—" A shadow passed across the broken windows, too large and regular to be natural. Nick's hand found his sword hilt as engines rumbled overhead, growing louder by the second. "Patrol ships," Yurik said, his playful tone vanishing. "3 of them, circling. They found us." Leonara stepped closer to Nick, tension replacing the soft warmth that had filled the space between them. "How long do we have?" "Minutes, maybe less." Nick scanned the Abbey's interior, cataloging exits and defensive positions. The main entrance was exposed, but there might be a way through the collapsed eastern wall. "Can you run?" "Can I run?" Leonara's smile held dangerous edges. "I survived 7 years in the underground. Running is what I do best." The engines grew louder, accompanied by the distinctive whine of energy weapons powering up. Through the broken windows, Nick could see lights sweeping the ground in search patterns. "There's something you should know," Leonara said as they moved toward the rear of the Abbey. "About why they wanted me for the cleansing, about who ordered it." "Tell me later," Nick said, but she shook her head. "There might not be a later. The man who condemned me, his name is Karen Derg. He used to run the camps, the selections, everything." The name hit Nick like a physical blow. Memories flooded back, cold eyes, clinical voice, The casual way he'd separated children like sorting livestock, the man who'd made him into a weapon. "Karen," he repeated, tasting poison. "You know him." "He made me." Nick's voice came out flat, emotionless. "After the selection, he was my trainer, my handler, until I escaped." The engines cut out suddenly, replaced by the sound of boots on stone, heavy, armored, moving with military precision. Too many to fight, even for him. "The back wall," Nick said, grabbing Leonara's hand. "Now." They ran through shadows and rubble, Uruk rolling alongside with surprising speed. Behind them, voices echoed through the abbey, commands, coordinates, the methodical chatter of soldiers securing a perimeter. The collapsed eastern wall offered a gap just wide enough for a human body. Nick pushed Leonara through first, then squeezed after her into the fading daylight. Uruk barely fit, his spherical chassis scraping against stone. "This way," Leonara whispered, leading them down a treacherous slope toward the valley floor. "There's a cave system, old mining tunnels." They moved as quietly as possible, but loose rocks betrayed their passage. Shouts erupted from the abbey as soldiers discovered their escape route. "There!" a voice called out. "Movement on the eastern slope." Energy blasts lit up the twilight, scorching stone dangerously close to their position. Nick shoved Leonara behind a boulder and drew his sword, knowing it was useless against aerial pursuit but unable to leave it sheathed. "The caves," Leonara said urgently. 50 meters down. We can lose them in the tunnels." More blasts, closer this time. The smell of ozone and superheated stone filled the air. Above them, a patrol ship descended like a metal vulture, its searchlight sweeping the slope. "Nick Velton," a voice boomed from the ship's speakers, electronically amplified but unmistakably familiar. "I know you're down there. 7 years of searching, and you lead me right to both prizes at once. How considerate." "Karen." Even through the distortion, his voice carried the same cold authority that had haunted Nick's nightmares. "Come out peacefully, and the girl won't be harmed. You have my word." Leonara's laugh was bitter. "His word, that's rich." "You know him well?" Nick asked, though they were hardly in a position for extended conversation. "He was my patron, my protector, right up until he decided I was too dangerous to live." Her blue eyes reflected the searchlight's glare. "Turns out, love really does make people weak. At least, that's his theory." The ship's engines shifted pitch, preparing to land. More boots echoed from above, reinforcements arriving at the abbey. "The tunnels," Nick decided. "We take our chances underground." They scrambled down the remaining slope, energy blasts tracking their movement but always a second too slow. The cave mouth yawned ahead, a black hole in the hillside that promised either salvation or a more private death. As they plunged into darkness, Chiron's voice followed them like a curse. "Run if you must, but you cannot escape what you are, Nick. What I made you. And she carries something that belongs to me. We will meet again soon." The darkness swallowed them, but not before Nick saw something in Leonara's eyes that chilled him more than Chiron's threats. Recognition, understanding, and beneath it all, a fear that had nothing to do with pursuit or capture. Whatever secret she carried, whatever made her dangerous enough for cleansing, Chiron wanted it back. And Nick was beginning to suspect that saving her had been exactly what his former handler intended all along. The mining tunnels stretched deeper than Nick had expected, a labyrinth of carved stone that swallowed their pursuers' voices until only dripping water and their own breathing remained. Emergency lighting strips, long dead, lined the walls like skeletal ribs. Leonara led them through the darkness with surprising confidence, her hand warm in his as she navigated by memory and instinct. "Here," she whispered, pulling him toward a side passage barely visible in Uruk's emergency illumination. "There's a chamber. We can rest." The space opened into what had once been a storage depot, carved wide enough for mining equipment but long since abandoned. Broken crates and rusted machinery created natural windbreaks, and centuries of mineral deposits had sealed most of the air vents, making it warmer than the main tunnels. "Cozy," Urich observed, his lens sweeping the chamber. "Very post-apocalyptic chic. Should I set up a perimeter watch, or are we calling this home?" "Watch the main tunnel," Nick said. "Alert us if anything approaches." Ah, the old give us privacy routine. Urich rolled toward the entrance with exaggerated reluctance. "And why am I even here? Should I turn off my visual sensors, or do you want a room for two? Though honestly, this is a cave. Ha ha, romance in the ruins of civilization. Peak human style. Urich." "Fine, fine. But if you two start making noise, I'm cranking my speakers to maximum volume. Some of us have delicate audio processors." The droid's complaints faded as he positioned himself at the tunnel mouth, leaving Nick and Leonara alone in the flickering glow of bioluminescent fungi that clung to the chamber's ceiling. The blue-green light made her purple skin seem to shimmer, highlighting the elegant line of her throat and the way his jacket hung loose on her frame. "So," she said, settling onto a relatively clean section of floor, "here we are, the mighty rescuer and his damsel in distress, hiding in a hole in the ground." Her smile held rueful amusement. "Not exactly the reunion I imagined." Nick sat beside her, close enough to feel her warmth but careful not to crowd. "What did you imagine?" "Oh, you know, dramatic reconciliation, maybe a palace, or at least somewhere with running water." She gestured at their surroundings. "Definitely somewhere I wasn't wearing chains and covered in someone else's spit." The bitterness in her voice made something twist in Nick's chest. Without thinking, he reached for her, then stopped himself. "Leonara." "Don't." She caught his hand, holding it between both of hers. "Don't apologize for what they did. And don't look at me like I'm broken." Her fingers traced the calluses on his palm, rough patches earned through years of sword work and manual labor. When she looked up, her blue eyes held something that made his breath catch. "You said I was yours," she said quietly. "Did you mean it?" "Yes." "Even like this? Covered in bruises, without a dress, carrying the shame of what they did to me?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Are you sure?" Nick cupped her face in his free hand, thumb brushing across her cheekbone where a faint bruise was already fading. "You're beautiful. You're mine. And if you'll allow it, I want our child to grow inside you." The words hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Leonara's eyes widened, pupils dilating in the dim light. "That's—" She swallowed hard. "That's a hell of a thing to say to someone you just found again." "It's the truth." "The truth." She laughed shakily. "I'd forgotten what that sounded like." Night fell beyond the cave mouth, though they only knew it by the subtle shift in air currents and the way Urich's complaints grew more subdued. Leonara had grown quiet, withdrawn into thoughts Nick couldn't read. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something. About the cleansing, about why they chose me." "You don't have to." "I do." She pulled away from him, wrapping his jacket tighter around herself. "Before they dragged me to that square, before the ritual, they made sure I was pure, virginal. They said it was required for the ceremony to have meaning." Nick's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "They were very thorough in their examination," she continued, each word precise and controlled. "Clinical, cold, like I was livestock being prepared for market." She looked at him directly. "I lost my purity on that altar, Nick, to instruments and procedures and the kind of violation that leaves no visible wounds. So when you talk about children, about things growing inside me—" She trailed off, but the implication hung clear. Nick moved toward her slowly, giving her time to retreat if she needed space. When she didn't pull away, he gathered her into his arms. "You weren't dirty," he said against her hair. They were, and now they're afraid. Afraid of what? Of us, of what we represent. His voice grew harder. Of the fact that their system couldn't break either of us. Leonara pulled back to study his face. Is that what you think this is? Defiance? Isn't it? Something shifted in her expression, surprise giving way to recognition, then to something warmer and more dangerous. You really did grow up, didn't you? My sweet boy with the broken smile. She kissed him then, fierce and desperate and hungry for connection that had nothing to do with rebellion or politics. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I want what you offered, she whispered against his lips. Give me a child. Let at least one thing in me be yours. What followed was tender and fierce in equal measure, two people reclaiming something that had been stolen from them both. His jacket became a blanket, her chains became jewelry, and the cold stone chamber transformed into something approaching sanctuary. Later, as Leonara dozed against his chest, Nick's discarded headphones played softly where they'd fallen, the audiobook narrator's voice weaving tales of heroes and redemption in the darkness. He stroked her hair and listened to her breathing, feeling something inside his chest that he'd thought permanently damaged begin to heal. It was Urich's sudden alert tone that shattered their peace. Incoming, the droid whispered through his internal comm. Single figure, moving fast through the main tunnel, no armor signature, but the footsteps were already audible, measured, confident, belonging to someone who knew exactly where he was going. Nick reached for his sword, but the voice that echoed through the chamber stopped him cold. No need for weapons, Nick. We are far past that point. Chiron Derg stepped into the chamber's entrance, silhouetted against Urich's emergency lighting. He looked older than Nick remembered, silver threading through his dark hair and new lines carved around his eyes. But his bearing remained unchanged, the same cold authority that had shaped Nick's nightmares for 7 years. "Hello, my boy," Chiron said, his voice carrying genuine warmth that was somehow more disturbing than any threat. "And you, my dear Leonara, I trust you've had time to reconnect." Leonara sat up slowly, clutching Nick's jacket to her chest but showing no fear. "Uncle Chiron, still playing puppet master, I see." "Uncle?" Nick's voice came out rough with surprise. Chiron smiled, an expression that managed to be both paternal and predatory. "Didn't she tell you? Leonara is my ward. Has been since the day I saved her from the camps. 7 years of protection, education, cultivation, until she decided to throw it all away for sentiment." "I decided to stop being your pet project," Leonara shot back. "Love makes people weak," Chiron said, his gaze shifting between them. "Devotion is a mistake. Only control can save civilization from its own destructive impulses." He paused, studying their positions, the obvious intimacy of their embrace. "But perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps what I've witnessed today suggests different possibilities." Something in his tone made Nick's skin crawl. Not hatred or anger, but the clinical fascination of a scientist observing an unexpected result. "What do you want?" Nick asked. Chiron stepped fully into the chamber, hands clasped behind his back like a lecturer addressing students. "To apologize, to explain, and to offer you both something far more valuable than the fugitive's life you're contemplating." His eyes held pain when he looked at them, genuine regret mixed with something that might have been love, if love could exist in a heart that calculated human worth like arithmetic. The silence stretched between them like a blade balanced on its edge. Chiron stood motionless in the chamber's entrance, his weathered face carved from shadows and regret. Behind him, Urich's optical sensors whirred frantically, trying to process threat levels for a man who had arrived without weapons, without guards, without anything except the weight of terrible truths. "Everything that's happened has been part of a larger design," Chiron continued, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had carried secrets too long. A test, if you will, and you've both performed magnificently. Nick's hand tightened on his sword hilt, though he hadn't drawn the blade. Something in Chiron's posture, the way he held his hands open, visible, unthreatening, suggested this wasn't an arrest. It was something worse, a confession. Performed? Leonara's voice cut through the air like shattered glass. She rose slowly, Nick's jacket wrapped around her like armor, her blue eyes blazing with fury. Is that what you call 7 years of hell? A performance? Sit down, my dear. Chiron's tone held the gentle authority of a father speaking to a beloved but rebellious child. What I have to tell you both will be difficult to bear standing. I've been bearing difficult things my entire life, Uncle. The word dripped with venom. Thanks to you. Chiron flinched as if she'd struck him physically. For a moment the mask of cold control slipped, revealing something raw and bleeding underneath. You weren't random children, he said, the words falling like stones into still water. You were created, grown, selected. You're the result of my 50-year experiment. The chamber fell silent except for the distant drip of water somewhere in the tunnels. Nick felt the world tilt sideways, reality reshaping itself around truths he'd never suspected. Not as weapons, Chiron continued, his voice gaining strength, but as a possibility, to create humans capable of loving despite everything. I raised you to understand whether love between two opposites could be artificially induced. Artificially induced. Nick's voice came out flat, emotionless. The tone he used when killing became necessary, like lab rats. I threw pain at you, fear, loss. Chiron stepped further into the chamber, his movements careful, deliberate. I deprived you, traumatized you, to see, would this break you or unite you? And you, he smiled sadly, you proved I was wrong. Leonara collapsed to her knees as if her strings had been cut. Tears streamed down her face, but her expression cycled through grief to fury and back again. You took everything from us, she whispered, then screamed, everything, childhood, family, safety, hope. And now you call it an experiment? The camps, Nick said quietly, pieces falling into place like a puzzle assembled by a madman. The selections, the separations, you orchestrated all of it. Not orchestrated, guided. Chiron knelt before them both, his hands pressed flat against the stone floor in a gesture of supplication. Do you think I enjoyed watching you suffer? Do you imagine it was easy to tear you apart, knowing what it would cost you both? Then why? Leonara's voice broke on the words. Why do it at all? Chiron was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands as if they were stained with blood only he could see. Because I never felt, he said finally, only analyzed. I feared attachment because it killed my family, my wife, my daughter, my son. Love made me weak when strength was required, made me hesitate when action could have saved them. His voice grew smaller, more human. I thought destroying emotions meant conquering death. But you showed me that love isn't weakness. It's an antivirus against the poison that turns people into monsters. Nick studied the man who had shaped his life through calculated cruelty, searching for deception and finding only exhaustion. You knew she was the only one I wanted to protect, and you still gave her to the ritual. Because I had to see. Chiron's composure cracked, revealing desperation underneath. I had to know if what I'd created in you both was real or just conditioning, if you would choose each other despite everything I'd done to break you. We're not your creations, Leonara said, her voice gaining strength. We're people, with hearts and minds, and I know that now. Chiron's admission hung in the air like smoke. Too late, but I know. He reached into his jacket and withdrew something small and metallic, a memory crystal, the kind used to store vast amounts of data. With reverent care, he placed it on the stone between them. "Everything's recorded here," he said. "Every manipulation, every calculated trauma, every moment I chose your pain over my conscience." His voice grew quieter. "And every moment I tried to protect you both, even from myself." Nick leaned forward, studying the crystal. "Protect us? Do you think you survived the camps by accident? That your escapes were lucky coincidence?" Karen's laugh held no humor. "I sabotaged my own experiments, Nick. Fed you information. Arranged for weapons to be left in convenient places. Made sure Leonara's punishments were never quite as severe as they appeared." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Nick remembered a dozen close calls, 100 moments when luck had been the only thing standing between him and death. Not luck. Intervention. "The night you escaped," Karen continued, addressing Nick directly, "the guards were supposed to kill you. I drugged their watch rotation, disabled their communications, and left your cell door unlocked. Then I told my superiors you died in the fighting." "You let me go," Nick said, understanding beginning to dawn. "I set you free, both of you, in different ways." Chiron's gaze shifted to Leonara. "Did you think your adoption was coincidence? That I chose you from thousands of candidates without reason? You were the girl who gave half her ration to a scared boy, who showed kindness when cruelty was easier. I couldn't bear to see that light extinguished." Leonara stared at him with an expression that mixed hatred and something dangerously close to understanding. "You called it love when it was convenient, called it weakness when it threatened your plans. I called it many things, most of them wrong." Chiron rose slowly, his movements careful, as if afraid of startling them. "But watching you both today, seeing what you became despite everything I put you through, I understand now. Love isn't weakness. It's the only strength that matters." From the tunnel entrance came the sound of approaching footsteps, many of them moving with military precision. Chiron's expression hardened as he turned toward the noise. "My former colleagues," he said grimly. "It seems they've decided I've become a liability." "How many?" Nick asked, his hand moving to his sword. "Too many, even for you." Chiron pulled a small device from his jacket, a neural inhibitor, the kind used for memory wipes and behavioral modification. "But they're not here for you. They're here for me." The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the whine of charging energy weapons. Voices echoed through the tunnels, commands and coordinates, the methodical chatter of soldiers closing a net. "Stand down, Chiron," a voice boomed through a portable amplifier. "You're surrounded. Come out peacefully, and your test subjects won't be harmed." "Test subjects," Leonara spat. "Even now, that's all we are to them." Chiron smiled, and for the first time, the expression reached his eyes. "Not to me. Not anymore." He looked at them both with something that might have been pride. "You were like a daughter," he said to Leonara, "and you," to Nick, "like the son I lost. I became the one you were obligated to kill. Forgive me. I didn't ask for forgiveness then, but I'm asking now." "Uncle?" Leonara's voice cracked with emotion she couldn't name. "I would stay," Chiron continued, backing toward the tunnel entrance. "But if I remain, you'll never be left in peace. My name drags everything with it. I must disappear so your love can live." He paused at the threshold, the neural inhibitor glowing in his hand. "But if you ever forgive me, give me a name, through your child." The device activated with a soft chime. Karen's body convulsed once, then collapsed as the neural inhibitor sent cascading feedback through his brain's electrical system. For a moment he looked peaceful, younger somehow, as if a terrible weight had finally been lifted. Then the energy weapons fired. The tunnel filled with superheated plasma as Chiron's former colleagues eliminated their liability with characteristic efficiency. When the light faded, nothing remained but scorched stone and the memory of a man who had learned to love too late to save himself. 1 month later, the abandoned homestead on Kyrin's northern plain looked almost habitable. Nick had spent weeks repairing the roof and reinforcing the walls, while Leonara tended a small garden that somehow managed to thrive in the planet's harsh soil. It wasn't paradise, but it was theirs. The baby arrived with the dawn, purple-skinned and perfect, with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Nick held him carefully, afraid his calloused hands might damage something so impossibly fragile. "He's beautiful," he whispered, awe coloring his voice. Leonara smiled through her exhaustion, reaching up to touch their son's tiny fist. "He earned this," she said quietly. "Not because he was good, but because he was still ours." "What do we call him?" Nick asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Karen." The name came out soft, but certain. To remind us that even those who broke us can leave a trace, if we choose love. Across the room, Urik's new humanoid body, a gift from sympathetic rebels who'd heard their story, performed a credible impression of eye-rolling. "You're still the silent type with terrible taste in names," the droid grumbled, but his voice held unmistakable affection. "But I'm glad you chose love, even if it came through ashes." As the sun set over their small sanctuary, Nick carved words into a stone marker they'd placed near the garden, simple words for a complex man. This world was built by pain, but became home thanks to those who refused to stop loving. Below it, barely visible in the gathering dusk, Leonara traced letters with her finger. Chiron Derg, uncle, enemy, father, forgiven. The baby stirred in Nick's arms, blue eyes opening to take in a world that had been shaped by cruelty but could still nurture tenderness. Whatever sins his namesake had committed, whatever pain his legacy carried, this child would know only love. And perhaps, Nick thought as he watched Leonara feed their son, while Urik told increasingly ridiculous stories to make her laugh, that was the greatest experiment of all. Not whether love could be artificially induced, but whether it could grow naturally, stubbornly, beautifully, in the spaces between broken hearts. The answer, he realized, was yes. It always had been. "My name is Karen Velton, and this is the story my parents never wanted me to tell." 21 years have passed since that dawn when my father carved words into stone, when my mother whispered forgiveness for a man who had shaped their lives through calculated pain. 21 years since they thought their war was over, their peace finally won. They were wrong. I'm telling you this now because tomorrow I leave this place, this sanctuary they built with blood and hope and stubborn love, because the galaxy is burning again, and someone needs to carry their legacy forward. Someone needs to finish what they started. But first, you need to understand how it began, how a man who stayed silent and did push-ups became legend, how a girl who crawled through shame became queen, how love really can grow from ashes if you're willing to pay the price. My earliest memory is of my father's hands, scarred, careful, impossibly gentle as he taught me to hold a blade. Not to kill, he always said, but to protect. The distinction mattered to him. It was the difference between what he'd been made into and what he chose to become. "Strength without purpose is just destruction," he told me once, watching me practice forms in our garden. "Purpose without strength is just good intentions. You need both." I inherited his silence and my mother's fire, her purple skin and bright blue eyes, his steady hands and unshakable calm. But I also inherited something else, something that made even Urik's sensors glitch when I got angry. "That boy's got power running through him like electricity through water," the old droid used to mutter, back when he still had his humanoid body. "Makes my circuits itch just being near him when he's worked up." My parents never talked about it directly, but I caught fragments, whispered conversations when they thought I was sleeping, worried glances when I accidentally shattered training equipment. Whatever Karen Derg had done to them, whatever experiments he'd conducted, the effects had carried forward into me, amplified. I grew up knowing I was different, knowing that the quiet life my parents had built was just an interlude, not an ending. The galaxy has a way of finding people like us, and it's rarely to offer congratulations. The first sign came when I turned 18. A ship landed near our homestead, sleek, predatory, bearing the insignia of the new hegemony. 3 soldiers emerged, led by a woman with cold eyes and colder intentions. "We're looking for the son of Nick Velton," she announced, her voice carrying across our garden like a death sentence. "The boy carries genetic markers of extreme interest to our research division." My father stepped out of the house, both hands visible but ready. My mother followed, her face set in lines I'd never seen before. Battle lines. "There's no one here by that name," my father said calmly. The woman smiled. "Genetic signatures suggest otherwise." Karen Derg's notes were quite detailed about his breeding program. "We've come to collect the final results." That's when I understood. I wasn't just the son of 2 people who'd found love in hell. I was the culmination of a 50-year experiment, carrying genetic modifications that made me valuable to people who saw human beings as components in a larger machine. The fight lasted less than 10 minutes. My parents moved like water and lightning, covering each other with the practiced ease of people who'd survived too much to lose what mattered now. My father's blade sang through armor like it was paper. My mother fought with improvised weapons and deadly grace, every movement calculated for maximum effect. But they weren't young anymore. 21 years of peace had softened them, just slightly, just enough. The lead soldier's weapon found my mother's shoulder, spinning her around and sending her to her knees. My father roared, the first time I'd ever heard him lose control, and drove his sword through the woman's chest. That's when something inside me snapped. The power that had always simmered beneath my skin exploded outward like a solar flare. The remaining soldiers' weapons simply stopped working. Their armor cracked. Their ship's engines died with a sound like screaming metal, and I moved. My father had given me 2 swords for my 18th birthday, one forged from the metal of his original blade, the other from fragments of Urich's first body. "Twin edges for twin purposes," he'd said. "One for justice, one for mercy. Choose wisely which to draw." I drew both. The soldiers were enhanced, trained, armed with weapons decades ahead of anything my parents had faced. It didn't matter. I cut through them like they were shadows, my blades moving faster than their enhanced reflexes could track. The power flowing through me made everything else seem slow, distant, manageable. When it was over, I stood among the wreckage, breathing hard and understanding finally why my parents had hidden from the galaxy for so long. "We have to leave," my mother said quietly, blood seeping through her fingers where she pressed them to her wound. "They know where we are now. Others will come." My father nodded, but his eyes were on me, on the destruction I'd wrought without breaking a sweat. "The choice is yours," he said. "We can run again, find another hole to hide in, or, I asked, though I already knew, or you can become what we were too afraid to be, what this galaxy needs, whether it wants it or not." I looked at our little sanctuary, the garden my mother had nurtured, the workshop where my father had taught me to forge steel and shape purpose, the stone marker with words about love growing from ashes. Then I looked at the ships on the horizon, growing larger by the minute. "Tell me everything," I said, "about Chiron Derg, about the experiments, about what I really am." They told me, all of it, how I was the product of genetic manipulation spanning decades, how the power inside me was designed to manifest under stress, to make me capable of things that shouldn't be possible, how I was meant to be a weapon in someone else's war. But weapons can choose their targets, my mother said, her eyes fierce despite her pain. And you, my son, were raised by people who believe in justice. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I've been learning what justice looks like when you have the power to enforce it. I've traveled from system to system, finding the corrupt, the cruel, the people who break others for profit or pleasure. I give them one chance to stop, just one. Most don't take it. The galaxy calls me the Ghost Blade, because I appear without warning and disappear just as quickly, leaving only justice in my wake. They say I'm myth, legend, the boogeyman that crime lords tell their children about to make them behave. They're not wrong. But tonight, as I prepare to leave this world for the last time, as I say goodbye to the place where love conquered hate and hope triumphed over despair, I feel something building on the horizon, something that will require more than one Ghostblade to stop. The new hegemony is rising. Karen Durg's research has been weaponized, turned into tools of oppression that make the old empire look benevolent. And somewhere in the darkness between stars I can feel them calling. Others like me, other products of that terrible experiment, some broken by it, some twisted, some who chose to serve the very system that created them, but some who chose differently. My father was right about one thing. You need both strength and purpose. I have the strength now, forged in the crucible of genetic manipulation and tempered by parents who taught me that power without compassion is just another form of tyranny. And my purpose? To finish what they started. To make sure that the love they fought for, the peace they carved from chaos, has a chance to grow beyond this little garden on a forgotten world. Even if it kills me. The ship waiting for me in the valley isn't large, but it's fast and well-armed. Urik's consciousness has been transferred to its navigation system. The old droid insisted on coming along, claiming someone needs to keep me from getting too dramatic. Besides, he said as we prepared for departure, your parents' story is over, but yours? That's just beginning, and I'll be damned if I miss it. As I write these words, dawn is breaking over the homestead. My parents sleep in the house my father built, wrapped in the peace they earned through blood and sacrifice. They don't know I'm leaving. They'd try to stop me, or worse, try to come with me. This is my war now. I close the journal and strap my twin swords across my back. Justice and mercy, purpose and strength, my father's legacy and my own choice. Tomorrow the galaxy will learn that the Ghostblade is more than legend. Tomorrow the real work begins. But first, one last gift for my parents. I carve new words beneath the old ones on their stone marker, words I hope they'll understand when they find them. Love planted the seed, time grew the tree, now comes the harvest. In the distance, engines fire to life. Urik's voice crackles through my comm unit. Ready when you are, young Kayron. Though I should warn you, long-range sensors are picking up something big moving through the outer systems, something that's actively hunting people with your particular genetic signature. I smile, feeling the power in my blood sing in response to the challenge. Good, I say, walking toward my ship and the war waiting beyond the stars. I was getting bored. Behind me, the homestead sleeps on, peaceful and protected. Ahead lies everything my parents sacrificed to prevent, a galaxy where love battles hate, where hope wars against despair, where the children of broken systems choose what they'll become. The Ghostblade rises into the dawn, carrying twin swords and his parents' blessing into whatever hell awaits. And in the deepest corners of space, something ancient and hungry feels my approach. Something that knows my true name, something that's been waiting 21 years for this moment. The real war is about to begin, to be continued in Ghostblade, the Hegemony Wars.